you very much, Kim. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone who's here joining us in this session. So, as Kim mentioned earlier, my intervention in today's session is based on very early reflections and analysis and observations through our engagement with ILM projects funded by the EU. Five amongst the 23 projects that George mentioned earlier. So I'm sharing this presentation together with Nining Liswante, our colleague from C4. So these projects are our Tonle Sap project in Cambodia, ecosystem conservation through ILM in Lao PDR, strengthening integrated SLM in Inga province in Papua New Guinea, Malua Urban Resilience Initiative in Timor-Leste, and integrated SLM through deforestation-free jurisdiction in Lamdong and Dak Nong provinces in in um, Myanmar. In Vietnam. Are you hearing me? Okay. Okay. So
Fine, yeah.
here on the second column, you will see the different ecosystem focus of these projects. So one can imagine how different and probably unique these projects are. So, for example, the Tonle Sap project in Cambodia is dealing with at least 6 or 7 different ecosystems: a biosphere reserve, a protected area, a key biodiversity area, a wetland, grassland, forest, and agriculture. The project in Lao is on wildlife, is focusing on wildlife, wetland, forest, agriculture, a Ramsar site. And in Inga province, it's forest and agriculture. The one in Timor-Leste is more of an outlier as it is focusing in an urban municipality. And the one in Vietnam is focusing on natural and production forests and agriculture. You can see the projects. Four out of 5 projects have the same ILM outcome indicators based on what's presented in their project documents. And these are production, meaning the attainment of agriculture and food production, well-being in terms of human and livelihood, biodiversity and ecosystems ecosystem conservation and restoration, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and effective governance. Whereas the Malua Urban Resilience Initiative has a more narrow outcome. ILM outcome indicator. It has 4 out of the 6 ILM outcome indicators: well-being, climate change adaptation, and mitigation and governance. And not all of the projects have started at the same time as well. So what I'm sharing, as I mentioned earlier, are the challenges and reflections from the project developers and project implementers, and these are neither. This is very far from complete or being comprehensive. This is really just initial, based on our analysis on the documents, as well as through bilateral meetings and the most recent field visit or learning missions held last week. So the major challenges on the left-hand column are 4. First is there is a real limited understanding and experience of ILM by project developers and implementers. And of course, I think the previous presenters has mentioned that this is really clearly linked to the way we went to school, the way where we were trained at school. We were not trained to be, integrators. We were trained to be specialists. So there is no wonder why there's always a lack of understanding and experience in ILM project development and implementation. And another one is there's a very strong institutional bias of project developers and implementers. For example, from the 5 projects, one organization who is actually implementing 2 country projects, has a very strong focus on conservation. It's a wildlife conservation organization. So that's a very clear institutional bias. And you can imagine that the lens, the entry point to their integrated landscape management would be a single species or a, you know, a single bird or something like that. So that's the institutional bias that is, you know, actually hindering a widening of the lens for integrated landscape management. So that relates again to the entry point, no, and
One moment.
the scale of intervention. And there is a sheer lack of enabling environment for integration in the project sites. Implementers like us operate in institutional silos, and that's a given context across many of these projects. So on the right-hand side, we noted some of the reflections expressed by project implementers in you know in these projects. So there's a realization that having various elements in a project does not always mean they are integrated. So if you just read the document, you will always see livelihoods, conservation, business, gender, and policy. All of those things are all there. The language, this language are all there, but that doesn't mean they are well integrated. Many of these projects are labeled as ILM without without negative intention. I think that is very aspirational, but demonstrating integration really remains a challenge. In fact, not to mention names, some of the project implementers were just very honest in saying that they just don't know how to integrate or what to integrate. And there's also a realization that to achieve ILM outcomes, there's really a need to understand the power dynamics of various stakeholders and to reconcile their various interests and to analyze trade-offs of various interventions. And this is no wonder. This is not a surprise. This has been mentioned by the previous speakers, Cora and James. ILM is much as a governance and institutional process that benefits from using appropriate decision-making tools. So it's always many of ILM successes, you know, are based on, you know, improved effective governance and institutional processes combined or matched with appropriate decision-making tools. This is a very specific a realization that biodiversity offsets do not contribute to the landscape in question. So biodiversity loss in the project area cannot be offset somewhere, you know, outside of which is outside. Most of the offsets are actually outside of the landscape in question. So there's a really that's a really important realization in the projects. Engaging the private sector in PES schemes do not always lead to improved internal business practices toward ILM. We know that some PES schemes are successful, initiated or supported by the private sector, but some of them are just used to as a greenwashing mechanism. But that do not really lead to a change in internal business practices.
We
There's
wind up.
landscape multifunctionality as the end goal of ILM, but there is a caveat that landscape functions are all constantly modified by stakeholders over time. So ILM plans need to be dynamic, to be long-term and adaptive. So also MSPs are a common approach to any project, you know, but they need to be institutionalized for continuity. And also the need for institutionalizing ILM in government programs, which is very, very challenging because of the siloed nature of government institutions. So initial ways forward with a central component project that is being that is supposed to support, you know, to provide support to this 23 LFF projects. So which is implemented by CIFOR-ICRAF. So it was suggested to have a group chat about ILM so that implementers can continue debating and learning about the conceptual and practical ways of doing ILM. Stakeholder net mapping by project implementers. Apparently, this has not been done thoroughly during the project design. Technologies and tools for ILM are also needed. and more and longer learning missions, which requires time and resources from the central component of the landscape for our future. So I'll that's the end. Thank you very much.